We have time for some questions and answers, so if you have a question for any of our panelists, please just raise your hand. We have a microphone we'll bring around so that you can ask your question so everyone can hear. Romy?
Dr. Deegan, you had a wonderful map on your PowerPoint of all the tribes in Florida, pre-Columbian Florida. Where is that available?
By artist Ted Morris, and it's you can find it in he has books published by Florida Press, Lost Tribes of Florida, and the book is from there, Lost Tribes.
This question is for all the speakers. No one really talked about what the early Spanish looked like. Were they light complected with dark hair? Did they have blue eyes? Were they homogeneous? Sort of what did they look like when they came over here and the natives first saw them?
Well, Spaniards are very diverse in their looks, and given paintings of that era, and we do have a lot of paintings of people in Spain in the 16th century, there were many red-haired people, blonde, dark-haired, so there was quite a bit of variety among them. And so we can't assume that Spaniards were dark-haired and dark-complected, because really most of the people in northern Spain were not.
Were they short in stature?
Mike asked if they were short in stature, and that's something we see a lot. The Spaniards were much shorter, and the Native Americans were gigantic. But there's not a lot of archaeological evidence, at least, to support that. Ponce de Leon is often said to have been very short, and we don't have his remains, but in St. Augustine, both the Spanish parish cemetery and some of the Native American mission cemeteries have been excavated, and the biological anthropologists have shown that there wasn't that much difference. That overall, the Native Americans were a little taller, but not giants. And the Spaniards' range for women in that period, the 17th century, was about 5 foot to maybe 5'4", 5'5", and men's up to 5'11". So they weren't that much smaller.
Thank you. This is for anyone. On April 2nd, this week, they dedicated a statue on Punta Verde Beach for Ponce de Leon, allegedly for his landing there. Was that tourism winning out over history, or what's that about?
Well, the ceremony at Ponte Vedra was based upon a reading of the log of Anton de Alaminos, as reproduced in 2 publications, a book by Frederick Davis in the 1930s and another book by William Lawson in the 1940s. Both men postulated landings in the area of St. Augustine north to Ponte Vedra. And that has been a common assumption over the years until the recreating voyage of Colonel Peck in 1990. His recreation of the route persuades nautical historians such as Eugene Lyon that probably is the landing site, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic coast of Florida. It will be contested, of course, for forever, because we don't have any substantive archaeological finds that could decide the question one way or the other.
Dr. Gannon, my son lives off of a major highway which reaches out from the center of Atlanta out towards the northeast. It's famous because it has Frederick Law Olmsted's Lateral Park running across it, but no one seems to know where the name comes from. People refer to it generally as De Leon, and that's too long for the kids, and they all call it Ponce. Now, how on earth or why on earth is Ponce de Leon Avenue named from the center of Atlanta? Does anyone know?
I do not know, but I remember seeing it myself.
Any other questions?
How do you think the story of the Fountain of Youth came about?
It was a myth that, as I said in my talk, circulated widely in the Mediterranean world over numerous centuries and was brought to this country by the first Spaniards. It has Eurasian origins, and certain people had a role in fastening Spanish attentions on it, particularly the cartographer Peter Martyr in the early 16th century and the historian Herrera y Tordesillas in the early 17th century. Everybody was fond of the legend, it appears. I suppose that it was because as you get older, and this is a birthday month for me, you do think of the advantages of going back in time and to what might be your best decade. I'm not sure. Well, I'm in my 8th decade now, and if I were to go back in terms of health, energy, strength, I probably would go back to my college years, and it was pretty much downhill after that. But I want to give you one of the reasons why the Spanish males were so given to this theory that somewhere there's got to be this elixir, this magic fluid. The Spaniards called what they needed to have cured el enflaquecimiento del sexo, sexual impotence. That's what they were trying to cure. See? And if you sometimes can't sleep late at night, which happens to be a problem now for me, you find all kinds of such elixirs and all kinds of remedies for ED and everything else that's now part of our vocabulary. So we're not far removed from the Spaniards in this fascination.
Yes, just an estimate of the population of the Western Hemisphere before Columbus, and then also were mounds, what percentage of mounds were used to live on?
Estimating the populations of people before Europeans arrived is a notoriously hard thing for archaeologists to do. Things happened so rapidly once the European diseases to which the natives had no resistance took effect that it's really hard to make an estimate for that. I think certainly 350,000 for Florida is an estimate we can all live with, and I think that figure has been given a couple of times here, and across the whole United States, something in the millions. As far as mounds goes, that really depends on what part of the country you're talking about. In Southwest Florida, where I work, most of the mounds are basically garbage dumps, some of which have been built up over a long period of time, and sometimes even in preconceived shapes. So people wanted to live on top of them, but they are basically composed of shells, bones, animal bones, fish bones, ashes, dirt, charred wood from their fires, and they've just been built up over thousands of years, and so they get quite high. We call those midden mounds. There are also burial mounds that are specifically, usually sand in South Florida, that are used for burying of the dead. And other parts of the southeastern United States, for example, there are temple mounds where there's earthworks that are specifically dedicated to ceremonies or something of that sort. So there are really many different kinds of mounds. Just because you know about one mound in a certain area of the country does not mean that all mounds are ceremonial or that all mounds are middens. It really is a matter of investigating in each region and seeing what's in the mounds themselves. Anybody else?
Just a quick question. I don't know if you're willing to pull up the slide of the Ferducci map, but there, yeah, I don't know how much you want to fumble with the computer.
Go ahead, Kathy. You were going to say something?
While Bill's doing that, I was just going to comment on the last question. It has been suggested many times that when Spaniards arrived here, the population of Mexico City was greater than that in Madrid. So it was a...
My estimate of the Western Hemisphere is 300 million. And I know that that is high, but I understand that every decade the estimates of the population keeps going up.
Our speaker suggested that his estimate was 350 million.
300 million.
300 million for the Western Hemisphere. But that,
Hard to know.
yeah, it's...
Hard to know.
So, and it's actually, you can see it on this full spread, but the next one that you had was a closer.
Yes.
I'm actually asking about what looks like the St. Lucie River. If you could comment on that, why it's so obviously portrayed. Obviously it hadn't maybe discovered the Lake of Okeechobee or any of the other inlets, but
Clearly it's all around the coast.
Where is St. Lucie on this map here? You're talking about here?
right, it looks to me.
It looks very close to it, yeah. And in fact, on a longer presentation that I did down in South Florida, I had a modern-day picture of that inlet and this picture, and it looks very, very close.
And why is that represented so large on that map? Any theories about that?
They must have explored it quite some distance and mapped it. And they were good mappers. Some things they had wrong, so their estimate of latitude was not right. The instruments they had to navigate were not very good. But in terms of making maps, that was of vital importance to the exploration and the exploitation of the New World. And so many people were trying to make maps of these things. But what's fascinating to me from my perspective from Southwest Florida is this is as far as it goes. So it's almost surely based on Ponce de Leon's 1513 voyage, for which there are no real records available. So clearly Ferducci and his people had access to those notes and maps.
I'm interested in the missionaries, the establishment of the missions in North Florida. They seem to be more successful with regard to the establishment and the conversion of the natives as opposed to the Calusa area where it seemed they were more resistant. Is that the case? And does anyone have any theories on why the North Florida area was more amenable to evangelization?
Excuse me. I don't know that it was more amenable, but it was more convenient in location because of the importance of St. Augustine, which for so long a time and all through the mission period was the only substantive city and port that Spain had in Florida. And it was in St. Augustine that the mission headquarters were established. There was a monastery there, a mother house, the Convento de San Francisco, where all of the new friars from Spain were trained, and then ultimately you had Criollo friars, people born in Florida, of Spanish descent, but born in Florida. And they did all of their theological training in St. Augustine. And from St. Augustine then, these men were sent out. They were first sent out northward in the direction of Jacksonville and as far north, as a matter of fact, as the present border of South Carolina. Missions were established all along the coastland. And then in 1607, the first mission was established in the interior of Florida. It happened to be Mission San Francisco de Potano, very nearby Gainesville, just 7 miles northwest of us. It's been found and excavated by Dr. Deegan. And I'm just getting that plug in while we can because we're raising funds. And then up along the district of Lake City and Monticello, Madison, and finally Tallahassee. Above Gainesville, you have the beginnings of the Appalachian Nation, which was a small district, but heavily populated and very warlike, and yet they proved to be the most amenable to Christian missionization and conversion. And most of the missions then ended up being built in Appalachia country. And it was a very successful mission program, which began in 1573 and lasted as far as 1706. The missions were substantially destroyed by the governor of Carolina, John Moore, first in 1702, when he destroyed all of the missions along the Georgia coastal islands, and then in 1704 through 06, he brought his military units and also a large number of Indian allies down to Appalachia and destroyed all of those missions. By 1706, he had destroyed the last of them in Temuco near Gainesville, and the mission period was over.
Any final questions?
My question is for Kathleen Deegan. My grandmother grew up in St. Augustine, and African Americans would look at the Castillo de San Marcos and say, well, we have a fort too. And back then, they would just look at the African Americans thinking they were crazy until the 1980s, 1990s, when Fort Mose A was discovered. My question for you is, what is being done to solidify Fort Mose A's memory and role in American history, and what is being done with the site?
Well, when the excavations were done there, the Florida Museum developed a large traveling exhibit on Fort Mose in 1989, and it traveled the country for 11 years and was on and off and was seen by millions of people. And a large part of that exhibit has been reworked, and it's in a visitor center that the Florida Park Service built at the site, and they have a wonderful museum, excuse me, that's built and visited by thousands of tourists every year. The site is now in the ownership of the state of Florida and administered by the DEP, and it's very well protected. It's been now a National Historic Landmark for the whole United States, so it's been well taken care of. Thanks for your question.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.